Welcome to Humanity in Deep Space, a planetary conversation surrounding the pros and cons, the range of interconnected issues and hard challenges facing the human future in space. We convene regularly to discuss a range of topics and opinions, from ethics, governance, and international politics to complicated questions of health, food, art, religion, procreation, and the human conditions that must be addressed as our species continues its inevitable transition into deep space. This is episode 20, Building the Near Future Cislunar Economy. Creating a sustainable cislunar economy, the Moon, Earth, and in between, has emerged as one key focus for a possible integrated science and commercial space economy. During this webcast, an experienced and diverse panel will discuss what a cislunar economy might actually look like, including cost, business ROI, technology, AI, structure, time frame, and ethics. Our guests today include Kenneth R. Human, former NASA attorney and Vice President, Human Space Solutions; Dr. Clinton W. Kelly III, former corporate and government engineer and Blue Origin astronaut; and Jeffrey Manber, President of International and Space Stations at Voyager Technologies and Chairman of the Board for Nanoracks. Our moderator today is Kris Kimel, founder, Humanity in Deep Space, and co-founder of Space Tango. Prior to this, Kris organized and led a variety of entrepreneurial ventures.
Hello, my name is Kris Kimel with Humanity in Deep Space. I want to welcome all of our viewers for today's program. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. As you know, Humanity in Deep Space is a nonprofit enterprise really focusing on exploring the conversation and digging into many of the issues, really important issues and hard problems that face us as humans as we leave the planets, including the interface between technology and our humans and our physical well-being, et cetera, as well as a lot of the other issues that are central to us as humans, being able to not only survive but thrive in space, which is going to be required as we, even in low Earth orbit, and as we move beyond low Earth orbit to the Moon, the cislunar environment, and on to Mars. And so any of you that have more information, you can always check us at humanityindeepspace.com. I want to, first of all, thank our sponsors, Space 629, Kentucky Science Technology Corporation, National Stem Cell Foundation, SSERVI, which is the Solar System Exploration Institute at NASA Ames Research Center, Baird Financial Media Collaboratory, Kentucky Humanities, the START program at the University of Kentucky, Higher Orbits, 22 Solutions, the College of Fine Arts, Visit Lex, Interstellar Foundation, Gaines Center for the Humanities, and Space Tango. So having said that, let me introduce the three panelists and for our conversation today about the cislunar economy. And just so you know, the idea that the title of Near Future was picked deliberately rather than just a cislunar economy, because I think I wanted to add some context to our conversation of a lot of the things that people are excited about. Are they, are we talking about the next 5 years, 10 years, 30 years for some of these, et cetera? So let me start by asking, I'll start with Clint Kelly. Clint I've known Clint for a number of years. He's a really bright person. I'm going to let him share a little bit of his background, so I won't spoil that. So Clint.
Good afternoon. My background is highly varied. I started out years ago as a naval officer working in nuclear weapon effects, and through a combination of circumstances was briefly involved in the Navy's attempt to do a manned orbiting laboratory. This was back in the 1960s. I went to the University of Michigan, got my PhD in electrical engineering, but did my thesis work mostly in experimental psychology. Ended up starting a company and then went into DARPA and stayed there for 8 years. Ended up running the National Fifth Generation Computer Research Program. As part of that, we had a number of applications of advanced computing technology, and one was to create an autonomous ground vehicle So in 1984, we did the very first demonstration of autonomous navigation without external aids of any sort. I joined Science Applications International Corporation in 1988 and stayed there until I retired. I've been quite interested in space economy for a number of years. It's a fascinating way to think of making money. And my fascination must be contagious because occasionally I see our two cats staring up at the moon.
Yeah. Okay. And Clint, tell me about your latest space exploration escapade.
Yeah, I took a flight 2 years ago with Blue Origin, uh, a brief flight, but we got up about 67 statute miles. You could see the curvature of the Earth. And I found that it cemented my belief that space is a real place. There are resources up there and great opportunities.
And I appreciate it. We've had some really interesting conversations about his personal thoughts on all that. How about let me go to ask Ken Human. Ken, tell about yourself.
Well, first, I want to thank you, Kris, for inviting me to be part of this distinguished panel. And hope everybody listening has completed their taxes, and hope it's been less painful for them than it was for me. My contributions to this panel are basically on the fact that I've been privileged to have a long career with NASA. There were different phases. I worked as an attorney initially, and then I worked as a specialist with international relations in Houston with the International Space Station program. I worked as a management official at our nation's biggest rocket test facility, Stennis Space Center. And then I worked as a team lead and as an advisor to the director of the Goddard Space Flight Center. And most recently, before my retirement, I was the director of legal operations at headquarters in DC. So I retired from NASA about a year ago, and now I'm the vice president of a small startup company called Human Space Solutions, offering business and consultant services.
I'm Jeff Manber, with President of International and Space Stations at Voyager Technologies, which is a strange title, but it reflects the two things I love: international and space stations. I've been working space stations for quite some time. Only American to work for the Russian manned space program for 9 years. I helped privatize the Russian space station Mir with the European Bank of Reconstruction, and helped introduce all sorts of commercial things we now take for granted: commercials, advertisements, non-professional travelers. I worked on Ronald Reagan Space Station Freedom, and did a commercial contract there using the Soviet Soyuz as a rescue vehicle. And then I helped start a company called Nanoracks when I wasn't working with Kris at Kentucky Space. And then after that, I helped start a company called Nanoracks, which we grew into the largest commercial user of the International Space Station. I'm very proud of that. We really helped introduce the CubeSat market, education. I'd like to say we busted up, no offense, Ken, the NASA monopoly on the space ops. And now I'm working, we have Starlab, the private space station. Voyager is the largest shareholder of that. Starlab, our space station, is in partnership with Airbus, Mitsubishi Corporation, Palantir, MDA of Canada. So it's a quite sophisticated undertaking. So this is really my fourth space station with Freedom, Mir, ISS, and now Starlab. And as we look to the lunar economy and lunar program, what lessons do we take? And I guess we'll get into that today. So thank you for giving me this opportunity, Kris.
Yeah, and thanks, Jeff. But you can see we have three amazing panelists, and that's why I was selected them. They all have great backgrounds, very different viewpoints, tons of experience, and are perfect to discuss this. So I'll go back to what I had started is so when we talk about a cislunar economy, from your standpoint, just to kick it off, because there's a lot of confusion about what that is to a lot of people. I talk to people, they're not sure exactly what it is. What does that mean to you when you talk about cislunar economies, exploration, et cetera? Ken, you want to start us off?
Sure, I would say, first of all, defining cislunar as, the volume of space in between Earth and Moon. There are strategic areas within that huge volume of space that are more important than others. And so far, basically, our initial baby steps have been into low Earth orbit. But, things are changing rapidly. And now, actually, even before low Earth orbit, there's been like a huge telecommunications industry that's developed in geosynchronous orbit. But now, we seem to be focusing more and more on the moon, and inevitably that will involve the Lagrange points more and more. And so, there's all kinds of different industries that have already developed. And we were just talking about space tourism, suborbital flights, and the possibility that we'll have space tourists in orbit and going to the moon. But there's going to be a lot of different types of activities that we're going to hear more and more about. And, even right now, if you do any research, like it's just incredible how much is going on right now, each week. And if you go to the internet, you'll find a lot of stuff that's already outdated and obsolete because things are just progressing so rapidly.
Jeff, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll say for those of us who have been doing this for a while, there were two words that were never paired together, and that was space and commercialization. Okay. And now that's, it's blasé. Okay. And now we're talking about two other words to be paired together, which I find extraordinarily beautiful. And that's lunar and economy. Okay. So everything we did for space commercialization, which was, as Ken said in Leo, is preparing us for this next phase. The way I look at it is we sort of have three phases in our lunar program. The first is the heavy lifting we're doing now to return humans to the surface of the moon, the heavy landers. Not quite a lunar economy. Not quite. That's more the public-private partnership. We're doing it much more with capital at risk than we were with Apollo, but it's not quite a lunar economy. The second phase is that infrastructure, where we have to begin to realize, can we get communications? Again, Ken mentioned Lagrange points, and we have to get a GPS system in place so we know where we're going and we don't bump into Chinese crafts by mistake.
Yeah, excuse me, Jeff. What do you say a Lagrange point? What do you mean by that?
Well, we saw beautifully with the Chinese program that to communicate from the far side of the moon, they had to send a satellite, the Chinese, what was it, 1,000,000 miles away, so that the rover on the far side of the moon could communicate and then go back to the Earth. I'll just say that to do that in the United States today would have taken us a decade. We would have been, what the Chinese did in that project of landing successfully a rover on the far side of the moon, doing some basic science and setting up the communication system was an extraordinary feat. It was really amazing. So that's what I mean about infrastructure.
Okay.
That is kind of getting into the lunar economy. We're not there yet, but phase two. And then for me, phase three is what I call the industrialization. And that's the cool stuff. And that's the lunar economy. That's when you're mining on the moon. That's when you're extracting. How do you produce oxygen? How do you get power grids set up, which could also be the infrastructure. So I look at it, those three, and we're preparing the first step now. Then we do some infrastructure, who invests what, and then we get into a lunar economy of services, mining, power grids, colonies, that sort of thing. So that's my.
All right. Clint Kelly, what's your take on all this right now?
So I'm going to take a broad view of cislunar and include low Earth orbit.
Okay.
Because that's where most of the business is today. In fact, just to take a look at the business today, it's about $630 billion a year, projected to grow to about 1.8 trillion by 2035. And I base those numbers from a report done late last year by the World Economic Forum in conjunction with McKinsey, called Space the $1.8 trillion opportunity for global economic growth. So where is our revenue coming from today? It's mostly low Earth orbit, some, of course, from GEO. It's mostly based on providing communication services, Earth observation, and what is now called PNT, position, navigation, and timing, from the GPS satellites. Interesting thing is it just uses one space resource, and that's location, which all the real estate folks would agree is the basis of their business. But there are sort of 6 space resources that I would put in, starting with energy, microgravity, vacuum, temperature, and if we're smart, the most important one is energy. It's fascinating that now is becoming recognized as a resource, and there are plans to make very extensive use of it. People can argue we're using it now. I mean, all of our satellites have got solar panels on them, but that's just barely dipping a toe in the water. People are planning on putting some really big energy consumers up there, starting with data centers. So I picked up a copy of The Economist this morning. Should have had it a few days ago, but mail being what it is these days, you're lucky to get it at all. And here's a company called StarCloud, and it says they want to build data centers in orbit. And they're one of 3 or 4 that have been in the press talking about doing exactly that. And there are sort of 3 reasons for it. One is the energy is pretty much free if you discount your capital investment. The second is you don't have to argue with people about permits to run transmission lines and all kinds of land use issues that might ensure that you never get anything up and running. And the third is actually kind of an interesting thing. It's you don't have to worry about water to cool it. So if you take a data center and say it's a gigawatt, maybe up to 2 or 3 gigawatts, that's a huge amount of energy you're dumping into that facility, and you got to cool it. And that's why nuclear plants, for example, have to locate or try very hard to locate near water. Water's getting to be a precious commodity. And I think there's going to be a lot of argument about who gets access to that commodity, to the point that some people looking at data centers say, we'll just sidestep it, we'll go up into space. Looking ahead, I've said, based on the World Economic Forum report, that you're going to end up estimates of revenue 1.8 trillion by 2035. And the question is, where's all that come from? Well, one of the places it comes from is just doing more of the same, with acknowledging that there'll be different kinds of services that satellites will be offering. But the real problem, I think, is that low Earth orbit's getting pretty saturated. And when you talk about organizations, including countries, putting up these huge satellites with predictions of 20,000, 40,000 per constellation, it's going to really get pretty congested up there, to the point where I think you need to begin to worry about changing the location probably to medium Earth orbit, which will change the latency a little bit on communications, but probably not enough to really worry most users.
As you get into this, one of the things that obviously doesn't get talked a lot about is the legal aspects of all this. If you've got companies up there doing work, as Clint and Jeff talked about, there's a question of, what's the legal infrastructure going to be or look like? And my observation right now is it's pretty loosey-goosey on a lot of areas. And I'm going to get all three to react because clearly for people to, when we talk about commercial, that's going to be a key part. And I just wanted to see what your initial thoughts were on that. And from your experience at NASA, how far have they gone? Have they, dug into this?
Well, first of all, I think the legal regime on Earth can be pretty loosey-goosey at times too. So shouldn't expect too much from space. But the big foundation of space law was this treaty that we entered into in 1967, the Outer Space Treaty. And that was like the big formulative document that's been signed on to by, most, majority of the nations on Earth, and spawned a bunch of other treaties, including, those concerning astronaut return and space registration and things like that. So, and it was done during a period of the Cold War, when there was a lot of concern about nuclear war. Matter of fact, the limited arms test ban treaty was enacted, just a few years before that. And so the Outer Space Treaty is was done many years before all these developments. At that time, no one could envision private parties being so involved in space exploration as they are now, and in the space economy. And so there's been some criticism of it, in recent times, but it remains the outstanding, foundation of how we approach space law. Did that answer your question, Kris?
Yeah. Jeff, let me ask you, as somebody who's been involved in the commercial aspects for a long time, including with Voyager. Obviously you guys are making huge investments in space. How does this come into play, if at all, in your all's conversations as a business?
Sure. It's a great question. We suffer on the International Space Station, whether it's ourselves, Space Tango, and others, because the intellectual property regime on the ISS is very diffuse, not exact, gives rights to the US government when it's done on the US side, and that has held back pharmaceutical drug research and other commercial research applications. There's been a great amount done on the ISS, but with a clear IP regime. When we enter the era of private space stations, once the ISS is retired, I think one of the reasons why we will see more commercial investment in LEO, low Earth orbit, is because the legal regimes will be clear cut when it's not multiple governments. One thing that Ken didn't mention, switching on the macro, is that obviously you're correct, Ken, that 1967, the Outer Space Treaty is the guiding bedrock. We in the United States don't like a large part of it. It's a little bit too socialistic, or whatever you want to call it. It does not allow private sector ownership of the moon. We came along, not we, but in the I guess it was in the first Trump administration, we came up with the Artemis Accords, led by friends Jim Bridenstine and Mike Gold. They came up with the Artemis Accords, led by NASA, to sort of take the Outer Space Treaty and take it into the next step and begin to look at some areas of commercialization. And so it's been signed on by dozens of space agencies. It's non-binding. And then the Chinese have developed their own. We're getting back into this era like we had in the Cold War with the Soviets and the Americans. One had, we had ComSat, and they had into Sputnik or something. I don't remember now. But anyway, so we have seen some evolution with the Artemis Accords, and it's a step in the right direction. And we will have to see more fine tuning of the legal regime, certainly.
Yeah. Clint?
I've got to believe that if water in some form is found on the moon and in commercial quantities, that the South Pole and other locations where it might be found will resemble Tombstone, Arizona, and the gunfight at the OK Corral.
Yeah, I
I
think you're
think you're
probably,
right.
yeah. I don't want to get, this is a whole, in fact, there is actually, we're actually working on an event, maybe a live event in the fall, Humanity in Deep Space, on the whole issue of conflict, ethics conflict, et cetera, in space, which is a huge issue in and of itself. But I think you're right. And I think that's one of the things when we talk about the uncertainty for businesses when they start putting all this money in, exactly what's the law going to be. And so that comes to the forefront. Let me ask you also, going back. So when we talk about commercials, we've talked about a lot of different things. I want to get your thoughts on, so what's where do we start? I mean, we've started, but there's, mining the moon, there's water, there's tourism, there's power, all these types of things. And I know there's no, no kind of step-by-step process, but what do you see when we'll use this a relative term, in the near term, I mean, within our lifetimes, now Jeff's pretty old, but I'm really young, so it's probably more time than me.
Sure, skip over me in the introduction. Insult me. Sure, go ahead.
But in any case, so what do we think the first big things are going to be? I mean, we've already kind of known some, but what do we really think where people are going to say, yeah, this is really happening, and we're going to put a lot of money into it? Yeah, go ahead.
If I may, I'll take a stab. You kind of asked two questions there, Kris. You shifted on us. The first thing you said is, what's the next step? And then you said, what's the big thing in the
Yeah.
short term? Let me say something very micro on the next step. We really need procurement reform. Isn't that boring to say? And we're talking about lunar economy. We're talking about humanity returning to the moon. And the major thing we need is stabilization and policy. I mean, here we are. We can debate, is Gateway going to continue? That's the American-led lunar space station, which is our architecture for the United States returning to the moon. Humanity returning to the moon involves the Europeans, UAE, the United States. And now there's talk that this administration will pull us out of Gateway. Okay, will we pull out of SLS? We can debate whether that's a good thing, whether that's a bad thing. But I mean, what we need is stable policy. We've had it on the International Space Station for 20 something years. You take it for granted. There's been no major changes. The cargo, the crew, the Russians and Americans have continued to work together despite the political conflicts. And that has allowed investment. That has allowed the ecosystem to develop in LEO that Clint was talking about. Now, how do we get to that lunar economy? And the next big steps, we need stable policy. We need to say, this is the way we're going, come hell or high water for the next 10. This hour we're going to return. Then we'll have a phase 2. We need clear legal procurement reform where the government can step up and procure services quickly and efficiently. So I'm answering the first part of your question. I'll leave the others on on what's the big thing when we know we're there. But that's what we need is that stable policy in lunar.
How does that fit in obviously space is global. So you're talking about the United States policy, obviously, right?
Yeah, but
so how do we finesse that with everybody else, the Chinese and the Russians and whoever else is?
Even never mind them. The UAE stepped in when Russia pulled out of doing a module for Gateway. The UAE stepped up. The Emirates. They're committing, I presume, more than $1 billion to do a module, and they're waiting like everybody else to see if Gateway is going to go forward.
Okay.
So it's a major issue of stability of policy.
Yeah. Glenn, I know you've got a lot of thoughts on this because we've talked about it.
Yeah, back in, I think it was probably about 1970, I began to read things about these great materials that we could make in space. And I'm still waiting. But I think we're right on the verge actually of making things in space, and a promise to do it at commercial scale and actually be able to make some money on it. There was a lot of publicity recently by Varda. They put a automated process into space. They stayed up there for quite some time in microgravity. They had an antiviral drug in it, and they were able to bring it back and show that the protein crystallization was relatively defect-free. And I'm told that that's important because it makes it more likely that the drug in which the proteins are a part will be taken up by the human system. Interestingly, to get around this intellectual property issue, this was all commercially done. And there are a couple of other companies that are thinking of doing the same thing, where the processing is automated and it's done in a vehicle that also serves as the reentry vehicle. So presumably you've got two things. You bring it back when it's ready to bring back, rather than waiting around for something that comes up to a facility. And ownership is pretty clear. Second thing I think that's so very important is we're beginning to think seriously about taking advantage of those vast resources in energy that are up there. So a proof of concept may well be data centers. There appear to be a number of companies that want to get into that. They seem to be well capitalized. And if they're really serious about it, they're going to need a lot of energy. And that says it will begin to proof test this idea of putting huge arrays into space, whether they're in geosynchronous orbit or in other orbits, like a high elliptical orbit is a matter of doing design trade-offs. I've been working with modest amounts of energy in Africa, south of the Sahara, for a number of years with some colleagues. We do very modest solar installations, but to see the effect of just modest amounts of energy on the quality of life is quite an experience. It is interesting if you look at energy consumption in those 53 countries that make up Africa south of the Sahara. About the average electrical consumption is about 130 kilowatt hours per person per year. In the United States, it's around 12,000, 13,000. So if you want to really begin to raise the quality of life there, you need to think of providing huge amounts of energy, but they lack an infrastructure. So the nice thing about space-based solar power is that you can beam it down where you want to, including beaming it to multiple places simultaneously, and provide places with energy that otherwise wouldn't stand a chance of getting it. There was a interesting Nobel Prize winner named Richard Smalley, got a Nobel in chemistry with two of his colleagues for discovering carbon-60. Prize was awarded in, I think, 1996. And he used his Nobel Prize as a bully pulpit. And so he would go around talking about what he called the really big problems. And he said they are in order: energy, water, food, the environment, and poverty. And he always ended his talks by saying, and if you solve the first problem, energy, you'll solve all the others. So I would hope that the future would hold space-based solar power in the not terribly distant future, because it will make an incredible difference. And just one more number: by the turn of the century, Africa south of the Sahara, those 53 countries, will hold 1/3 of the global population. And how they're going to get the food they need and a lot of other things is up in the air.
Dan, you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, like in terms of your question about, what's going to happen in the near term, I think one of the most remarkable things that nobody's mentioned yet was Firefly Aerospace successfully soft landing on the moon just a little over a month ago. And they had like 10 payloads that are conducting a variety of experiments for the short-lived life of the mission. But, you know, that's just really an extraordinary thing. And it's actually part of a program called the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program that NASA sponsors. And the reason I want to bring this up is that I think that, you know, there was an allusion earlier to the role of NASA. And I think NASA has done a pivot from the early days of space exploration when it was really the only player in town. And now, you know, they're doing things to feed commercial space. As a matter of fact, that's an acknowledged part of their mission. And if you look back at just about all the commercial activity going on right now, it's got its roots in NASA trying to figure out how to like be a catalyst for commercial space, including the Falcon 9 development under the Commercial Orbital Transportation System program at the early part of this century, and Starship now. And I think, you know, it's easy to postulate or argue that, you know, Falcon 9 has revolutionized, you know, the commercialization of LEO and really is a big contributor to this whole tremendous activity that's going on right now. And Starship potentially could, you know, have a similar role.
I would agree, if I may, Kris and Ken, I jump in. I agree, of course, what you're saying, Ken, but I would just add for those of us who lived in the sausage factory that NASA was not always a happy catalyst and had to be persuaded at times. But I share with you that we've reached a really good point, and one has to hope for those who believe in commercial that bringing in Jared as the new administrator, someone who's gone up on 2 missions themselves, is only going to accelerate the, you know, put the space effort on steroids. But, you know, Kris, one other point, if I may, you said, you know, when will we know an aha moment that it's kind of real, the whole lunar? I think it will be another combination maybe of SpaceX and Elon maybe going to the moon with or without the okay from the United States or something as he tests his Starship. One day we may wake up and hear that, hey guys, I'm heading this one to do, you know, Cislunar around the moon. And the other moment that might really resonate is we get a couple more missions like India and China, you know, India discovering water on the surface of the moon. You know, you start to get this global sort of recognition that humanity can use the resources of the moon, live on the moon. I think it will be a combination of driven by entrepreneurs, whether Bezos or Musk, driven by a Jared as administrator of NASA, along with international. That there may just be some amazing discoveries coming out of India. They're so low cost. They're amazing to watch what they can do. So I think that will be a gotcha moment.
Let me ask you, a good part of the cost, obviously, when we talk about Cislunar or many other aspects of space, deal with keeping humans alive and the human factor. So one question I would have to throw out there is, what's the balance here? How much of this could literally be done without direct, extensive human involvement in space? How much of this can be done without humans? And should we be putting a priority on that just because of the cost?
I'll just say this, that right now and consistently over time, the biggest part of NASA's budget gets eaten up by human space exploration. It's like basically half of NASA's budget. And, you know, if there was like less emphasis on that, then, you know, it would enable more robotic exploration, which I think, you know, should be like, you know, the precursors for human space exploration to the max.
I think first off, let's acknowledge the reality that as we do this conversation, the administration has put forth its budget, which cuts to the bone robotic and the science interplanetary missions, and keeps pretty strong the humans. So first, we'll see what Congress does as a pushback, but the administration has really decimated a lot of interplanetary and science missions. It's the question of why we're doing space, isn't it? If we're doing it for humanity, the spirit, NASA has long argued that humans have to be there. I think that as we move along, Lord help us, and AI kicks in and robotics kicks in, the idea of the human robotic interface is going to get more blurred, and we will see more robotic first, and then human following. But today, NASA, of course, marches forward with the humans. Clint didn't send his, Android double or something to go up on New Shepard. He sent himself. And because he wanted to experience, it's that innate factor of humanity. He didn't put on three virtual reality glasses and stay at home. So you're right to raise the question, Kris. I think that more and more in the decades to come, there will be human robotic interface and blurring of what the role of the humans are, whether on space stations or whether in exploration. So we just have to see how fast it progresses.
Glenn.
Yeah, I think that there is a reason for people to go, and it's because they'd like to have the experience. But if you're in the business of making money and you're doing commercial space, humans are very capital intensive. And there is coming a point where many of the tasks that humans do can be done by robots or by supervised robots, sort of an evolution of what we called years ago telerobotics. If you want to get some idea of where the technology is going, get on Boston Dynamics website, take a look at the incredible agility and dexterity that those robots have. For a long time, developing a robotic hand was a huge problem. And I suspect that's still to some extent a problem, but it's come a long way. So if I were in the commercial business, I would look long and hard at the cost-benefit trade-off between the capital requirements to support a human doing the work and robots. It just seems to me that we've reached a point where an awful lot, if you do away with the experiential motivation, can be done by robots. I have to also interject a thought about going to the moon. Quickest way to go to the moon is to ditch the Space Launch System. That's kind of $1 billion a launch, and you throw it away. What a waste. That's why in Washington it is called sometimes a Senate launch bill.
Shelby.
Yeah. But it's I was reading in the Wall Street Journal just a few days ago with one of the back issues, which I get through the mail these days, that it looks like there's serious consideration by the administration being given to ditching it. Yeah. Don't know if that'll work or not, but I think we could get to the moon a whole lot faster if we didn't have to be encumbered by that.
Well, you say that, but the acting administrator, Janet Petro, just said a couple of weeks ago that Artemis 2, which won't land, but will fly around the moon, she has every reason to believe that it's going to launch like in April of next year. And they've already got the first stage stacked at Kennedy. So it just seems like an incredible waste to abandon that. And I don't see any way in the world anybody will beat that timeline with Artemis 3 scheduled for a landing just a year after that. Now, who knows how credible those dates really are, because everything in this industry gets pushed out to the right. But still, I just don't see, anybody coming up with a different system. And incidentally, once again, Starship is part of that plan. That is the human lander system that will operate from lunar orbit to the moon surface, for Artemis 3.
If I may, two comments quickly. One, if I have to make a prediction, we'll do Artemis 2 and 3 and then end the SLS program and just do more on commercial and Starship and others. But I wanted to reveal something, if I may, when you're talking about robotics and how much more efficient robots will be on operations. When NASA was getting ready to release the proposal on the free flyer that we bid on and subsequently were one of the winners with our Star Lab, I begged NASA, I begged them to allow for a human tendered, okay, instead of being astronauts 24/7. Because, as you say, Clint, we're running a commercial platform where 90% of the capital for the private free flyer under what's called the CLD program comes from the private sector. Okay, not counting NASA will be a customer and not counting the European Space Agency a customer. We are raising quite a considerable amount of money now. It's over $1 billion. Okay, so unlike cargo, unlike commercial crew, the capital's coming from the private sector. So quickly, I went to NASA and said, please, let us submit a human tended. We estimated it would lower our costs 50 to 70%. And NASA said, no, we want 24/7 astronauts.
But that's changing, don't you? I mean, you realize that, right, Jeff? I mean,
No, I don't. I'm
like
every
VAST
day
and their
on the
Haven
CLD
space,
program,
their
it's changed.
Haven space station is going to be human tended.
Which space station?
The VAST station,
Has that been selected?
pardon me?
Has it received any funds from NASA? Has it been?
Not yet, but the commercial LEO destinations
Yeah.
plan is being revised as we speak, as you know, and there's going to be a further down select, and the players could change, and
Yes,
the
they
plans
could.
will change.
Yes, I don't think we're
Now,
giving.
I'm not speaking on behalf of NASA. I don't have any secrets or any inside knowledge. I'm just saying that it's common knowledge that it's going to change.
Oh, okay. I work every day.
From what I heard,
That's news to me. So anyway,
Yeah, so I think I think that's true, and I think that I mean it's a big when people ask me when I give talks, inevitably I'll get a question: when do you think we're on Mars? We'll be on Mars, and my answer is always we're already there. Regardless of what the timing is, space exploration is going to continue to be a hybrid of humans and machines separately, and who knows in the future, maybe somehow it's together in some form. And I would encourage you, for those of you, I alluded to earlier, the webcast we did, the book is that we have Don Goldsmith, who was on our webcast, is called The End of Astronauts. And it's a really interesting book. Clint and I were talking about it on the phone the other day, and worth reading, that takes a really interesting position on this. A couple questions that I've been meaning to get to. It's interesting. We've got a couple questions about, making food in space and manufacturing, et cetera. But we have 3 or 4 questions that have come up, and we don't have time to get into this at depth, but we kind of alluded to it in the earlier part, really talking about conflict. Are we really going to be able to, given human nature, are we really going to be able to do this? And how can business really operate without some sort of sense of a conflict free, if I don't mean that literally, but figuratively, or at least some guardrails beyond that?
Well, the Article 4 of the Outer Space Treaty, says that the moon will be used exclusively for peaceful purposes. And yet right now we live in a world where there's a lot of mutual distrust and suspicion, and the Chinese space program is closely linked with its military. And our own military is making plans that could be interpreted as violating that. So I mean, I think this is a great time to raise awareness, among the people listening here, and we should all approach this as a matter that should be planned well in advance and thought out, and hopefully if we could do things like the test ban treaty during the height of the Cold War, perhaps it's not too late to still ensure that space is used for peaceful purposes.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I just answered the question on as quick as I could on ag tech, that first question. Um, One of the disappointing things for me, the Space Force is the largest growing part of the space budget, obviously. Publicly, the Space Force folks have said we're preparing for a conflict in the space terrain with China. I don't hold a security clearance, so I can say that, some of the actions taken in recent months and last year with other nations circling our important satellites and just showing that they could take it out were perceived negatively by the United States. It's so disappointing to think that all of this developments we're talking about, the rise of the commercial, the rise of new manufacturing, pharmaceutical drugs, the spirit to go to the moon, and we end up in a conflict. And so, it's just so disappointing. And of course, it's concerning given how much our society is dependent on space assets. So I don't know how you say, can we avoid it? We're humans, and so, but it's very troubling. We cannot ignore it. And it's an unfortunate development we didn't see during what I consider the unfortunate time of the Cold War, the Apollo program. Now we have so much more of a robust program, and now we're talking conflict. So
Yeah. And I don't think avoid it. I guess the question is, can we even, can we come up with a system to manage it? And I have to admit, I'm not overly optimistic about that, but hopefully I'm wrong.
yeah.
Clint, you want to chime
Yeah, I
in?
would just simply say that we have barely scratched the surface of using space resources. And if we don't screw it up, we have extraordinary improvement in the quality of life for vast numbers of people. And having seen what a little use of just energy makes in the lives of people, it's just a strong wish on my part that we can figure out how to do this without bickering over it. There's enough to go around.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Should we be spending more time? I don't mean to be Pollyanna. Should we be spending more time with our international neighbors, global neighbors, and even in this country, at least talking about appealing to our common humanity and the good that can come if we cooperate with, millions and millions and millions of people, as opposed to, as we normally do as humans, concentrating on, offense and defense and weapons, and we've got a bigger gun, et cetera. I mean, is that not that it would work, but is that something we should be at least doing more of? Jeff, you're smiling, so I would.
Yeah,
When you smile, I don't know if that you agree or it's like, no, that's the.
No, I just think I'll say that as I said at the opening, I'm president of International for Voyager. I spend a lot of my time talking now to other governments, space agencies, and the like. And their question is their third or fourth question each time in the last year and a half is, how do we make sure we're not dependent on the United States and Elon Musk in space?
Right.
Okay, this is now grown. I won't say the names, but it's grown to be a very important part of the equation. It's deeply upsetting to me. I've devoted my career to international, believing that we need to work together on something so deeply, part of our DNA, so deeply important. And yet now the meetings, they start, they're polite, they're this, and then they say, how do we decouple from the capricious wishes of American entrepreneur like Elon? How do we make sure we have our own satellite system? How do we make sure we have our own launch capability? So again, getting back to sort of the question on conflict, we all want to avoid conflict. We all want to work internationally. Yet governments are saying to me, look, we need our own launch capability.
Yeah.
We need our own satellite system. So that's why the smile. It's such
Right. Well, no, I agree. And beyond, they're going to do that. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just the way it's always, it's been like that for thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
Human, and and they're going to do that, and I understand why.
Yeah.
But I think getting and maybe again, it's naive, but whether are there angles we can focus? Not that they're solutions, but it would be you can imagine if we came up with an idea that could whether it's energy or something else that could make a huge dent into world hunger
Right.
and resource demand. But no, I think you're exactly right. We just have a few minutes left. We always have a number of international viewers for these webcasts. This has been great. I've had several comments about how much people have enjoyed the panel. So let me just ask each of you for your final thoughts. I'll start with Jeff.
Thanks, and Kris, and thanks. It's great to be here. It's a good conversation. We did just scratch the surface. I deviate on 1 week. I'm extraordinarily optimistic on everything happening in touching the frontier of space, and other weeks I'm terribly depressed on what's happening as we touch the frontier of space. But in general, my gosh, the progress that we've made in the past decade or two since you and I have known each other has been extraordinary. And we're really on the cusp of finally returning to the moon somehow, whether, Ken's vision of the architecture or Clint's desire is whichever way we go. I think this time we're going to return to stay as sustainable. And that's extraordinarily exciting. And we need a dozen more conversations like this over the next few years. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ken.
Well, I just will say that the Cislunar economy is off and running. It's growing by leaps and bounds. But, it's uncertain about the extent to which this administration will fully fund science in the current year and in the future. And we already talked about the uncertainty surrounding Artemis, particularly the Gateway and SLS parts. And, even to the extent you acknowledge the legitimate reasons for those criticism, as I said before, it just makes me wonder if we're, throwing out the baby with the bathwater,
Right.
Abandoning something that would at least get us to short-term objectives. Particularly landing on the south pole of the moon,
Okay.
as soon as possible. And so, I just hope that I'm a big believer in space science. And, I think that's one of the exciting things about the times we live in, is that we have the benefits of all the data we're getting from the James Webb Space Telescope and all these other missions. And I think it's going to enrich life on Earth in a multitude of ways. And, we're privileged to be alive today, to be seeing these things happening around us.
Yeah. Thanks, Ken. Clint, final thoughts?
Yeah, my hope is that people will begin to recognize that space resources are practically unbounded. There's plenty for everybody if we can figure out how to share it. But if you can think of how to use the energy resources, and I will say also water, hopefully, if it exists on the moon in commercial quantities, it'll change the life of millions of people. And I think it'll happen sooner than people might suspect, if we can figure out how to do it without conflict.
Thanks. And Jeff, one thing we didn't get to, with you and I worked on for a number of years together, and still we didn't touch on, which probably is worthy of a conversation in itself, and that's the whole biomedical
Yes.
potential and possibilities that exist in a microgravity environment.
Along with ag tech. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ag
Yeah.
tech,
So
biomedical.
that may be another one we got to
Yeah.
need to circle back on. Clint Kelly, Ken Human, Jeff Manber, thank you so much. Again, I want to thank all of our sponsors. This will be posted online free of charge, as everything we do within the next week. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in and for the questions. And next time we'll be tagging with another subject, hopefully just as challenging as this one. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us for Humanity in Deep Space. In his book, Pale Blue Dot, A Vision of the Human Future in Space, Carl Sagan wrote, "Your own life, or your band's, or even your species, may be owed to a restless few, drawn by a craving they can hardly articulate or understand, to undiscovered lands and new worlds." Our continued exploration of space is accompanied by profound questions, responsibilities, and obligations. What is our place and ultimate responsibility to the larger universe? And how do we maintain a sense of humanity as we leave the planet Earth? These questions and more are discussed in our videos, as well as other curated content at www.humanityindeepspace.com or on YouTube by joining Humanity in Deep Space. The music for this episode was written and performed by Danny Grandstaff and is available at dannygrandstaff.bandcamp.com.